The auction yard was a haze of dust and voices, the kind of late afternoon where the sun spilled sideways through weathered boards, painting everything in amber. Boots scuffed against packed earth, spurs jingled with restless energy, and the air smelled of sweat, tobacco, and horsehair. Then came the silence that clung too tightly, for all eyes had turned to the pen at the far end. Inside, a black horse shifted like a storm contained, ribs sharp beneath a hide cross-hatched with scars. His mane hung in tangles, his eyes wide, wild, and searching. More shadow than flesh, he seemed a creature born from rumor itself. Mothers drew children close. Men spat into the dust. Someone muttered, "Monster," and the name stuck in the air like burrs. The auctioneer barked his rehearsed lines, but even he could not keep the smirk from his voice. "Barely worth the bullet," he jeered, and laughter rippled through the crowd. The horse lunged at the gate, iron clanging like gunfire, and the sound sent a ripple of fear through the onlookers. He reared, pawed the air, eyes rolling white, and the stories grew with every second: devil horse, killer beast, curse of the desert. The townfolk fed on the spectacle the way vultures feed on what's left behind. Among them stood Elias Boone, a farmer worn by years and silence. His hat brim shadowed a face lined with sorrow, the kind that lingers after love has gone. His wife, Mary, had passed 2 winters before, and since then the days stretched long and hollow. He had not come looking for a horse. Truth be told, he had not come looking for anything. Yet when his gaze fell on the trembling creature in the pen, something in him tightened. Like a string drawn too long and finally plucked, the jeering thickened as the horse struck the boards again, sparks in his hooves, foam at his mouth. "Unbreakable," someone crowed. "Shoot it and be done." But Elias, watching from the edge of the crowd, saw something different. Not rage, not devilry, just fear and sorrow made flesh. Scars like that didn't come from nature. They were carved by a man's hand. He stepped forward. A few voices laughed, others warned. "Don't be a fool, Boone. He'll crush your skull." But Elias kept walking, boots slow against the dust, breath steady. He climbed the pen gate and dropped inside. The air seemed to hold its breath. The horse shuddered, muscles taut as bowstrings. Elias did not rush. He moved like a man easing into a prayer, slow, deliberate, patient. He extended a hand, fingers rough and open, the distance between skin and muzzle closing inch by inch. The crowd muttered, anticipation thick as storm clouds. A twitch of an ear, a flare of nostrils, a half-step backward, the animal was ready to bolt. But then, against every expectation, he stilled. Time slowed. Dust floated like motes of gold around them. Elias's hand brushed the horse's muzzle, and instead of violence came stillness. A long breath passed from horse to man, from man to horse, as though the two had found in each other the same wound. For a heartbeat, the pen was silent, but for the soft sound of air moving between them. No words passed Elias's lips, yet the crowd heard what silence can say. He saw himself reflected in the horse's dark eye, scarred, solitary, still standing. In that moment, monster and man ceased to exist. What remained were 2 souls, tired of being broken. Then the auctioneer, baffled, called for bids. The crowd chuckled cruelly, wagering whether Boone's hand would still be attached by nightfall. Elias raised his hand, voice quiet but sure. His was the only offer. The gavel struck. Laughter rolled across the yard like distant thunder. That fool farmer just bought himself a demon. When Elias led the horse from the pen, the sun was falling low, shadows stretching long across the dust. Every eye followed them, some with pity, most with scorn. But Elias did not look back. The animal walked beside him, ears flicking nervously, yet no longer thrashing. And as the 2 figures crossed the threshold into the deepening light, the thought rose unbidden, soft as prayer. Sometimes the world's monsters are nothing more than its wounded, waiting for a hand steady enough to remind them they are not alone. The farm greeted them with silence. A low wind pushed against the boards of the porch, whistling through the eaves where an old rocking chair stood empty, untouched since Mary had passed. The corral was little more than patched rails and dry earth, and the barn carried the scent of hay grown brittle with time. Into this place of quiet grief Elias led the black horse. The creature's hooves struck the ground like drums of unease, head tossing, eyes darting for escape. He lashed against the stall door, muscles heaving, a storm that refused to be caged. Elias did not push. He did not lash back. He simply sat on a wooden crate by the stall, elbows on his knees, voice low as a hum. A tune Mary once sang drifted into the space, threadbare yet tender, and though the horse's sides still trembled, he ate a mouthful of hay before turning away. It was not much, but it was something. And in that small gesture, Elias saw a door open. Days spilled into weeks. The neighbors watched from a distance. Their voices carried on wind and rumor. "That Farmer Boone will get himself killed," they muttered at the general store. "Can't tame a monster." Children mimicked the horse's wild rearing in play while their parents warned them to stay clear of Boone's land. Each word was a stone thrown, not against skin but against solitude. Elias bore it with the quiet grace of a man used to being misunderstood. And yet, little by little, the animal began to shift. In the copper hush of dusk, when sky and earth blended into bruised colors, Elias leaned against the corral fence and simply waited. The horse, Midnight, he had begun to call him, paced in circles, nostrils flared. Then, almost imperceptibly, he came closer. One step, another, until his head lowered, weight pressing into Elias's shoulder. The farmer's eyes burned with unshed tears. Two broken creatures finding steadiness in the same breath. It was not all peace. There were nights when storms howled through the plains, bending the trees, tearing the fences. One such night, lightning tore the sky open, and midnight shattered the weakened corral. Hooves struck mud, and panic surged through the animal like fire. Townfolk, drawn by the commotion, gathered at the edge of the property. "This is it," they hissed. "He'll be trampled to death." Lanterns flickered, fear made louder by gossip. Midnight reared, striking sparks in the dark. Elias walked toward him with no rope, no whip, only the steadiness of his breath. Rain hammered his shoulders, soaking denim through. His voice was low, not command, but prayer. "Easy, boy. Easy now." Step by step, he drew close, hand reaching as it had that first day in the auction pen. The horse trembled, quaked, but then he stopped. Breath slowed. The thunder rolled on. But within that small circle of mud and man and beast, calm rooted itself. Midnight pressed his head against Elias's chest, and the crowd fell into awed silence. Word spread as it always did, but the story was changing. No longer Devil Horse, no longer Boone's folly. Whispers carried wonder now, a reluctant respect. Weeks later, Elias entered Midnight in the town's spring roundup, not for glory, but for the sake of proving what no one believed. The corral was crowded, all eyes sharp with expectation of disaster. When Elias swung into the saddle, silence held tight. Midnight shifted beneath him, not with rebellion, but with readiness. The whistle blew, and what followed was not chaos, but grace. Midnight cut across the arena like a river flowing through stone, his strength guided by the lightest of touches, the faintest shift of weight. Dust rose, sunlight splintered, and for the first time the townsfolk saw not a beast, but a partner. Children's mouths hung open. A boy reached through the fence, palm outstretched, and Midnight lowered his head, allowing the smallest of touches. The air itself seemed to exhale. When it ended, no one spoke at first. Then applause, hesitant, scattered, grew into a sound deeper than noise, almost reverent. Elias tipped his hat, not for pride, but for gratitude. Midnight stood tall beside him, scars still marking his body, yet transformed. Not erased, but honored, proof that survival is not the same as ruin. As twilight fell, Elias led Midnight back toward the open plains. Together they walked, their shadows long against the dying light. The voice of the old soul narrator settles over the scene. The world is quick to name monsters, slower to name miracles. Yet sometimes, beneath the weight of dust and judgment, they are the same creature, waiting only for a steady hand. And as the stars rose, Elias's story spoke outward, beyond himself, beyond the horse, into the quiet of every listening heart. If ever you are called unworthy, If ever your scars are made spectacle, remember this. Grace blooms where least expected, and what the world once feared may one day be the very thing that sets you free.